that was a initiation rite of passage movie for him. And here we're going to connect the Manson killings with the Beatles and all of that occult scene. Have you done any research in that field? I did last year.
Absolutely.
There is so much stuff attached to the Manson killings.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I think that Manson was some kind of high priest of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think he was crazy. I think he's perfectly sane. Just very. I saw an interview with him.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's actually released quite a few interviews for being somebody. He's like a celebrity crazy person.
Oh no, they're trying to get him paroled right now. By the way.
Are they? Oh, lovely. And in one of these interviews, he has this moment where he looks at the interviewer with this really disturbing look, the same kind of look that Al Pacino has when he's channeling Lucifer, and basically says to the interviewer, "You think that I am stuck in here? I can come out of here if I want to. I like it better here." And he talks about the fact that he can leave his body whenever he wants to. He's not confined to his cell. That he is where he is because it suits him better to be where he is.
Yeah.
Right? And it felt very lucid to me. It didn't feel like somebody bragging. It felt like he was kind of letting you in on his in secret, right?
Right.
And I think that man, if you listen to, there's several interviews of his out there on YouTube.
Yeah.
And if you want to listen to horrible, disturbing stuff, you can listen. And basically, the feeling that I get from him is that he is somebody that is very much into the whole occult system, and that he's playing a function of some kind, even in prison. That is why he's getting all these interviews, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He was the one that said that he carried out the killing, right, because he was told to do so by a track of the Beatles that I think was in the White Album.
Helter Skelter.
It's called Helter Skelter, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that played backwards was saying whatever.
Yeah.
And that, you could kind of dismiss that, although we know that even the guy that killed John Lennon said something very similar, right? That a music tune told him to do it.
Right.
And we know that that is one of the ways in which they insert the hypnotic commands is through pieces of music. And we also know that music is one of the ways that they use to do the whole mind control programming anyway, right? But aside from that, the Beatles, very soon after the Manson killings, released a track that was called Sexy Sadie. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And in that particular track, it talks about Sadie, and one of the women of the Manson killings was called Sadie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she was the craziest one, and she was the one that supposedly killed Polanski's baby, right? Literally by wounding the womb and doing all of that kind of stuff. And then I started looking up some footage of her, right? And there is a piece of footage of her going to the trials. That is what the song Sexy Sadie is all about. It's basically saying, Sexy Sadie, don't... It's kind of telling her not to talk, because otherwise bad things will happen to her.
Right.
And while she's walking towards the camera of whatever journalist is filming the whole thing, she goes towards the camera and she does the 666 sign on the eye. Right. With her hands. So you tell me if that's not a cult. Do you know what I mean? A cult member. Yeah. And I think that the same girl, I'm not sure if it was her or another one, but there was 3 girls that carried out this whole thing. It's either her or another one of that group, was also one of the main actresses in a film that was called Lucifer Rising.
Right.
Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, Kenneth Anger, sure.
That's right. And she was
Bobby
in that.
Bobby Beausoleil actually plays Lucifer, and he's in prison right now for
That's right.
the Tate Manson killings.
Right.
Yeah.
And in that movie that I tried to watch for a little bit, and then I actually found it quite disturbing, not because of what they were showing, but the energy that was attached to it. It felt a little bit too real.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided that I didn't really want to watch it any further, right?
Mm-hmm.
A little bit too dark.
Yeah.
But there is a scene where there's this woman that I think is naked and has some weird headdress where you can't see her face. And basically that woman is one of the women that was part of the whole Manson thing, right?
Right.
So all of these people are all connected because that guy that did the Lucifer Rising was a buddy of Anton LaVey.
Right, Kenneth Anger, yeah.
Yeah. So and so there was this whole LA, Los Angeles, San Francisco connection.
And London as well, by the way.
And London, yeah.
Yeah, with the Stones and Anita Pallenberg.
That's right. And also the other thing that connects all of these together is that the home in which Polanski's wife was killed, right, by the Manson tribe,
yeah,
apparently was the home. It was in some ways connected to Doris Day.
Well, it was the home of the Folger family.
Yeah,
and it was Terry Melcher lived there with, I believe it was Abigail Folger's daughter, and Terry Melcher was hanging out with the Beach Boys a lot, and Dennis Wilson. So Terry Melcher is Doris Day's son, and he's really the main connection between the Manson family and the Beach Boys and people like Neil Young. I mean, you know, Charles Manson was making the rounds in L.A. trying to be a musician, and Dennis Wilson freaking loved Charlie Manson. Of course, Dennis Wilson is dead now, and even Neil Young, who was in L.A. at the time, was commenting on how Charles Manson was the greatest musician he ever met.
Right.
You know, so these guys were, you know, they were trying to, you know, Manson was trying to get into the business. Terry Melcher was not there that night at the house. So.
But the other connection is the connection to the Beatles, because there's an interview of John Lennon.
Yeah.
Where John Lennon says that whenever they went to California, they used to stay in that house.
Yeah.
So my sense is that that home, aside from being, you know, musician hangout, if we start to accept that a lot of these people were into the occult to start with, right, that it almost was as if that place was like a little reunion, do you know what I mean?
Right.
A hangout for cult activity, right?
Yeah.
And so they were all in it together. The only reason for which Roman Polanski's wife was killed was ultimately because Roman Polanski allowed for her to be the sacrifice for his rise to acceptance into Hollywood and rise to fame. Like that was you know how they all have this blood ritual that they have to do, this blood sacrifice when they enter, that kind of links with what you were saying about the Beatles. Maybe Buddy Holly was their blood sacrifice.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Maybe that was who needed to go for them to enter. There seems to always be somebody needs to always go for the next one to come to be able to be allowed to go through.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
have you ever read
nice
Dave?
Cheery topic, huh?
Yeah. have you ever read Dave McGowan's stuff on this?
No, I haven't. No.
I recommend, if anybody has any interest in this, go hunt down Dave McGowan and look at the secret history of Laurel Canyon. And Dave McGowan has done an exhaustive research on the players of the 60s and how it all comes out of the Laurel Canyon scene. And it is really, I mean, he connects a lot of dots in this. And there's actually Manson is actually the third figurehead in a trio of characters that occupy this house in Laurel Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
And this house in Laurel Canyon it's a famous house, and it was I think Tom Mix owned it at one time. It was this huge house that had like all these little underground sort of passages that led into these grottos in the garden. And this guy's name was what was his name? His name was Vetus Calcus. He was this very strange and dark character that had like a commune of sorts up in this house in Laurel Canyon. Mm-hmm. And they called themselves freaks.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't hippies; they were freaks. And he was he taught sculpture and art, but he was also he also was having sex with his rich patrons. Very dark character. And Dave McGowan makes this connection. We're going to run out of time here on the live streaming portion of this, but I want to give Katie a little more time. So if you want to continue to listen to this, we're going to have this as part of the podcast. It won't be a part of the actual streaming show. But thank you for joining me on the streaming part of the show, and I'll be back on Monday with the Monday Macchiato. Have a great weekend, and I know I'll see you on Monday because the world's still going to be here. And Katie and I are going to kind of round this off here in the next few minutes, and it'll be part of the podcast. So thanks again. I'll see you on Monday. So anyway, he starts off with this Calcus character and his group known as the Freaks. And what happens is that almost all of a sudden overnight in L.A., the scene changes. 1965, 66, there's a massive 665 really, a massive sea change on Sunset and Vine, in places like the Whiskey A Go Go and other clubs down there they were strip clubs, and overnight they became music clubs. I mean, overnight it was like somebody made a decision. It's like strip club over, music club now.
Right.
And so what happens is that now that you've got a music club, you've got to have bands to fill the music club. And the first band that makes an impact on the LA scene is the Byrds. And Dave McGowan looks at all the different players in the Byrds, Roger McGuinn, Chris Hillman. The Byrds producer is actually Jim, what's his name? He is the guy, the producer of the Byrds, that is really sort of the driving force, because the Byrds really couldn't play their instruments. Jim Dickinson is the producer, and Jim Dickinson is a very interesting character. So it's Jim Dickinson, and then the Byrds. Then you have bands like the Mamas and the Papas, who begin to sort of, form and have their own scene. And he gets into who John Phillips is. John Phillips comes from a military family. John Phillips spent time in Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He talks about this. It's part of his history, right? So then he gets it, then he starts to unfold what happens with all these people who begin to congregate in Laurel Canyon. They all have connections with either wealthy families or the military-industrial complex. All of them, without fail. Jim Morrison, of course, his father is Admiral Douglas Morrison, who is there at the beginning of the Gulf of Tonkin, sells the Gulf of Tonkin and the Vietnam War. Who does Jim Morrison go to kindergarten with in Washington, D.C.? Gail Sloatman, who eventually winds up becoming Frank Zappa's wife. Okay? So he gets into David Crosby. David Crosby's connections with the Van Dyne family, very wealthy. He gets into Stephen Stills. Stephen Stills used to talk about to people how he was in Vietnam, and he gets stoned off of his brain, and he'd talk about, I was in Vietnam. And it's like, well, Stephen, Vietnam's fairly new, and he was like, really what Stephen Stills was talking about was he was part of some sort of special forces team in Vietnam. Right. So what happens is that this Vetus guy comes in with all of his freaks,